the law. I know that our escrow company, Escrow Options, does provide that letter, and there are several other escrow companies that do as well. But you really have to be careful because sometimes they won't put the words under penalty of perjury, or sometimes they won't meet all the requirements exactly the way we need it. And if you can't get that, then your client still isn't fully protected. And again, this is just where it comes into play that the people creating the laws, like the IRS, they don't do real estate, so they don't know the different arms of our business that we have to try to get this information from, like that real estate agents are different than escrow companies, and we're all kind of following our own set of rules. So that's why this can be so difficult sometimes. The most important thing to me is that you try to obtain this information prior to close of escrow, because if you're not getting what you need, there are some remedies, and I'm going to show you some of those things here in just a second. Okay, so the other option that I think is out there for you is a letter that I have prepared that is now, it should be as we speak, in the virtual office under the Evergreen Realty website. And this is a letter that you can send to the escrow company. And what you would do is get this letter signed by your buyer at the time maybe that you were doing disclosures. And so the letter basically tells them, "Dear escrow holder, the undersigned buyer is requesting one of the following in order to be in compliance with Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act and IRC Section 1145. So it's telling we have to have one of these three things: either a signed seller's affidavit, including the social, a letter from escrow signed under penalty of perjury that the proper exemption and social are on file, and then you can attach a QS form for them if you want to make it easier. Number 3 says if items 1 and 2 cannot be provided, withhold 10% of the sales price as required by IRS. If you have the buyer sign this and you give this letter to escrow prior to closing, it puts the escrow company on notice that if they cannot provide you or they refuse to provide you the information as you're requesting it, then they have an obligation to withhold the 10%. And that is how you can best protect your buyer from liability. So it's really important that you, I would do this if it were me personally. I would do it on every transaction. Right when I was doing disclosures, I'd have the buyer sign it and I would send it to escrow, and that way I don't have to worry about it. Send it to escrow in an email and ask them to confirm receipt so you can document that they got the info. Okay, for more information on this subject, if you have other questions about how it all works, you can always go to www.car.org. And if you go under legal, there's what they call a Q&A, and the title of it is Federal Withholding Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. It's a very informative, probably 3 or 4 page document, but it really goes in depth about what is required. I use that sometimes when we're having trouble getting what we need from other agents or from escrow companies, and that's very helpful in making people understand, because when the law changed and the IRS said that they would accept the qualified substitute statement, a lot of agents and brokers basically said, we don't need seller's affidavit anymore, and that's the end of it. And they kind of wash their hands of it, but they don't really understand that, in fact, you need one or the other, okay? So that's the end of the basic presentation. I'm going to go ahead now and go through any questions that we might have, if anyone has any. I don't see any questions on the queue right now. Are there any questions that I can answer for anyone? I'm giving it just a second here to see. Okay. Oh, REO or short sales? Someone had a question about that. Short sales, absolutely, it's still required. And one of the things that happens on short sales is a lot of people will say, this is ridiculous. It's a short sale and everyone knows that the seller isn't getting any money. But remember, withholding is about capital gains. And capital gains is the tax that is paid on the gain from what someone purchased a property for to what they sold it for. And in between that time, someone could have taken out refinance loans and done other things, you know, cashed out of the property, and they may still owe some capital gains tax. Even if they didn't, even if they purchased it for more than they sold it for, that knowledge does not protect your buyer from liability. So the IRS doesn't, you know, if the IRS came and they were coming after your buyer for the taxes, you wouldn't be able to get on the phone with IRS and use that explanation to solve the problem, because the IRS requires that the affidavit or the qualified substitute be done, and that is the only thing that satisfies their law. So don't just take it into your own hands and say, I know this doesn't apply, and forget about it. REOs. Now, REO is a little bit different. However, we're still supposed to ask for the form, but I know it's very difficult to get. The law says that on the federal level, that any foreign banks would be required to provide this form, or would be required to withhold. Now, a lot of the banks we deal with, like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, you know, and these different banks that might be doing REO properties, we know that they're U.S. corporations. So whenever you're dealing with that situation with an REO, I would encourage you to just email me or your manager and tell us who the bank is and that they're refusing to provide the information. At the very least, with an REO, you might email the escrow company and just ask them and get a written response from them. Technically, you're still supposed to have the affidavit, but I know most of the banks just say, we're exempt, because they probably are, and they refuse to sign the form. So we kind of have to play the REO, you know, by ear as it happens. So let us know if you have any problems with that. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions on the queue right now. I want to let you know that this webinar will be available on the website, on the virtual office, under the Evergreen Realty website, and it's going to be under Evergreen TV, so if anyone needs to go back and review what we talked about, everything should be there. In addition, I'm going to go ahead, that letter that I showed all of you, I'm going to email it to everyone who attended the webinar today so that you will have a copy of that to use in your transactions in the future. Okay? So thank you all very much for attending, and I will talk with you soon.